Dawn in Copper Bend rose like a tired sigh across the valley, brushing the rooftops with a pale gold that felt more like mercy than mourning. The dust hung low, soft as flour in a baker's breath, and the world seemed to hold still long enough to listen to the quiet steps of Clara May Whitlock. She walked with a wicker basket against her hip, filled with warm biscuits she had risen before the sun to make. Biscuits she hoped would buy her a little dignity in a town that liked its women narrow and its judgments wide. The breeze caught loose strands of her hair, and she tucked them back with a hand that trembled more from memory than the chill. Some hearts, you see, carry storms beneath their ribs, and some mornings carry the weight of a whole lifetime. She reached the sheriff's office just as Deputy Hale Branson leaned against the rail, handsome in a cruel sort of way. He looked her over as if measuring lumber, not a living soul. Clara May held out a biscuit, voice small. "Fresh baked, if you'd like one." Hale took it, sniffed it, and smirked. Then the men on the porch came out, 3 ranch hands with dust on their boots and meanness in their smirks. One of them nudged Hale, and Hale raised the biscuit like a prop. "Well, boys," he said too loudly. "Looks like Clara May's trying to feed me fat so I can match her." The laughter that followed rolled over her like a wagon wheel. Too slow to chase. That's why she comes around bringing food instead. Clara May didn't remember dropping her gaze. Only the heat climbing her cheeks and the way the morning sun suddenly felt like a spotlight. The biscuit in her hand trembled. She turned before the tears could rise, determined to swallow them like stones, determined to keep walking. Inside Old Man Pike's general store, she tried to catch her breath. But whispers travel faster than dust in a small town. 2 women near the flour sacks lowered their voices just enough to sting. "Poor thing lets herself go," one murmured. "Shame she don't try harder," the other replied. Clara May felt herself shrink, becoming too visible and invisible at once, like something the world had half forgotten. She left the store without buying anything, the bell on the door ringing out like a small, sad goodbye. She didn't see the stranger ride in until the wind shifted. A tall man on a dark horse, clothes worn by mountain weather, beard thick as bramble. Elias Crow, the kind of man people whispered about, lived alone, talked little, saw everything. He stepped off his horse near the livery, glancing toward the basket Clara still clutched as if it were the last true thing she owned. The moment their paths crossed, Clara May's fingers fumbled. The basket slipped, biscuits scattering across the dusty street like startled quail. She gasped, kneeling, apology on her lips, expecting the usual snickers. But Elias knelt too, slow and unhurried, as though her world wasn't falling apart, but simply unfolding. He picked up a biscuit, brushed off dust, and took a bite. Chewed, nodded. "Good," he said softly, like he was speaking to the wind rather than the crowd. Clara blinked, unsure. "You don't mind the dust?" Dust never ruined nothing honest. His eyes settled on hers, steady as an old oak. Good food comes from honest hands. There was no judgment in his gaze, no quick measuring, no cruel smirk. Just a quiet, grounded seeing that made something loosen inside her chest. It frightened her how much it meant. But kindness in a small town is a spark in dry brush. It catches fast, and not always in a good way. By the time Clara reached the corner near the boarding house, snickering girls were already whispering. "Did you see? She's throwing biscuits at the mountain man now. Desperate, I guess. Imagine him taking pity on her." The words clung to her like burrs. Clara stepped off the boardwalk and walked toward the pines, head down. The woods had always been the only place she felt she could breathe. Pine air cooled her cheeks, and sunlight sifted through branches in broken, healing shapes. She leaned against the young spruce, letting her breath settle. She didn't expect to hear footsteps, didn't expect them to be gentle. Elias appeared, holding the last biscuit she had dropped. "You forgot this," he said simply. She stared at the biscuit, then at him. "You didn't have to follow." "I know." His voice was low, steady, as though carved from the same rocks that shaped the mountain ridges behind him. "But you look like someone who needed not to be alone right now." Her throat tightened. "People talk. People always talk," he replied, leaning lightly against a pine with the ease of a man who'd made peace with solitude. Talk about me, too. Sam's strange. Slow to speak. Not all there. Doesn't matter. They don't know the truth. Clara wiped her cheek with her sleeve. What truth? That a man's only wrong when he lets other folks' voices get louder than his own. His eyes softened. You know that pain better than most. She didn't know what to say. Words felt too heavy. But he didn't rush her. He didn't fill the silence or try to fix it. He just stood there with her, letting the quiet settle between them like shared shelter. After a moment, he offered the biscuit again. She took it slowly, the warmth of his nearness steadying her trembling hands. I ride down to town twice a week, Elias said, almost shyly. If you ever have extra biscuits, I buy some. She blinked, startled. You don't have to. I know what I need, he interrupted softly. Good food. Honest company. Her heart felt like a bird fluttering against its own ribs. The sky began to sink into oranges and golds. Clara took a slow breath, feeling something shift inside her. A small loosening, a tiny crack in the heavy armor she'd built around her heart. She started walking home, the forest path glowing in the last light of day. Behind her, Elias watched, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable but warm in its stillness. Not hunger, not pity, just a man recognizing something true. As she stepped out of the trees, Clara brushed her fingers along her own arm, feeling its softness, wondering, for the first time in too long, if maybe her body wasn't the enemy she'd been taught to believe. Maybe it was simply a story that had never been told right. The town behind her hummed with gossip, but the mountain man's quiet voice stayed louder in her mind. Sometimes the heart recognizes shelter long before the mind dares to. And as the last light slipped away, Clara May walked toward her small room above the boarding house feeling, not lighter, but steadier, as though the world had not changed but her place in it just might. Clara May returned to her days with a quiet ache inside her, the kind that feels both tender and hopeful, like a wound beginning to heal. For 2 mornings she lingered at the window, watching the thin trail of smoke rising from Elias Crow's distant mountain cabin. She wondered if he waited, if he expected her, if she should dare. By the 3rd morning, she tied a fresh ribbon in her hair, packed a dozen warm biscuits, and told herself she was simply delivering food to a man who'd paid her kindness with honesty. Nothing more, nothing less. The path up the ridge was softer than she remembered, pine needles muffling her steps like a welcome. When she reached the cabin, she found Elias on the porch, repairing a saddle strap. He looked up, startled, as though he hadn't quite believed she'd really come. But the surprise warmed into something gentler. You walked all the way up? He asked, standing slowly. I had extra biscuits. Her voice wavered, but she held the basket steady. A small smile tugged at his beard. Then I'm the lucky one. The porch creaked beneath them as he led her inside. His cabin was simple but warm, wood smoke lingering in the air, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a kettle simmering quietly as though it had been waiting for her. He poured her tea, and she handed him a biscuit, and for a long while they sat with the comfortable silences of 2 people used to being seen, but trying anyway. Elias spoke first. I wasn't always up here, he said, eyes fixed on the steam rising from his cup. Used to live in town. Didn't fit in well. Talked too slow. Understood too much. Folks didn't like it. Clara watched the way his fingers tapped the mug. I got tired of being judged for things that weren't wrong, he added softly. I know that feeling, she whispered. I know you do. Their eyes met then, quiet, warm, understanding in a way that felt almost dangerous in its tenderness. No declarations. No reaching hands. Just the slow-building trust of 2 people drawn together by the same kind of hurt. But Copper Bend was not a place that let gentle things grow easily. Word spread faster than wildfire that Clara May had been sneaking up the mountain to see him. By the time she returned to town, Hale Branson was leaning near the well with a smirk carved sharp as a blade. So he drawled loudly enough for half the street to hear, Mountain man's starving up there, huh? Guess he'll take whatever he can get, even a girl like you. The laughter that followed wasn't as loud as before. Some folks looked away, ashamed. But the damage struck deep all the same. Clara felt her ribs tighten, that old familiar shame rising again like cold water. She clutched her basket, turned, and walked away without a word, but her steps felt heavier than they had in months. The next day, she didn't go to the ridge. Or the next. She stayed in her small room, baking, sweeping, pretending the world beyond her window didn't exist. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself Elias wouldn't notice. But he did. On the third morning, Copper Bend froze in place when Elias Crow walked down the main street. He had cleaned up, wearing a proper coat instead of his usual work shirt, and though he moved with his usual quiet steadiness, there was purpose in each step. People whispered, parted, stared. Mountain men didn't come down unless something important called them. He found Clara near the well, hands damp from filling a bucket, eyes red from nights she thought she'd hidden. "You stop coming," he said simply, not accusing, just honest. She swallowed hard. "People talk, Elias." He nodded once. "Let them. Lies die fast in the mountains." Something in his voice steadied her, but before she could answer, a shadow slid across the ground behind them. Hale Branson stepped closer, boots crunching with the confidence of a man too used to having an audience. "Well, look at this," he sneered. "Big girl's got herself a mountain shadow now." Clara stiffened. Elias didn't flinch. Hale circled, voice dripping with mockery. "Tell me, Crow, what's it like? You really want her? Or are you just hungry for anything warm?" The words hit Clara like a slap. She felt the world spin, her breath catching. Hale stepped closer, too close, boxing her against the well. The basket shook in her hands. "Men like him don't want girls like you," Hale whispered harshly. "Nobody does." A silence fell, so heavy it felt like the earth held its breath. Elias stepped forward. Not fast, not with fists, but with a stillness so absolute it froze Hale mid-smirk. Elias's shadow fell over both of them, steady as a sheltering tree. "Hale," he said quietly, "you don't know a thing about want." Hale scoffed. "You really going to claim her in front of the whole town?" Elias looked at Clara, not at her body, not at her fear, but at her, the way one looks at something sacred they've carried a long time without knowing. Then he turned back to Hale, voice low but clear enough for the entire street. "I don't need fancy," he whispered. "I need honest. And she's the truest soul in this town." Gasps rippled through Copper Bend. Even horses seemed to pause. Hale blinked, thrown off balance. The certainty drained from his face, replaced with something sour and small. He muttered something under his breath and stepped back, retreating with all the grace of a man who'd underestimated the wrong, quiet soul. When he was gone, the hush remained. Clara stared at Elias, breath trembling. Why would you say that?" He looked at her with the gentleness of a man who understood the weight of loneliness. "Because it's the truth," he said, "and truths deserve daylight." She blinked hard, feeling the sting of tears, but not from shame this time. From something warm, something new, something terrifying in its tenderness. The next morning, Clara walked through Copper Bend with her shoulders not squared, but naturally lifted, like her spine finally remembered how strong it was. People looked at her differently now. Some curious, some repentant, some embarrassed they'd ever laughed. But Clara didn't seek their approval. She had found something worth more, a sense of her own weight, not as a burden, but as a presence. That evening she walked the ridge path again, carrying a basket, as much for her as for him. Elias was on the porch, whittling a small bird from cedar. When he saw her, he didn't rise quickly, didn't look shocked, just smiled in that steady way of his, like he'd been waiting without worry. She sat on the porch beside him. The sky spread above them in a bruised purple dusk, the stars just beginning to spark like shy thoughts. They talked quietly, sometimes not at all. Their hands rested near each other on the worn wood, close enough that the space between them felt alive, warm, hopeful. No kiss, no sudden declarations. Just two hearts learning to breathe beside each other. Some stories, you see, don't begin with a touch. They begin with a kindness that finally finds a home. And if you're listening now, wondering whether the world will ever see you beyond the shape of your body or the weight of your scars, remember this. Your worth was never meant to be measured by those who mock your softness. It was meant to be held by the ones who look at you and see truth, honesty, and all the quiet strengths you've carried alone. Let yourself believe it. The right souls always do.